The snow fell heavily outside the massive windows of the Whitmore mansion, each flake catching the light from the grand chandelier that hung in the empty dining room. Theodore Whitmore sat in his leather chair, staring at the untouched Christmas dinner that his chef had prepared before leaving for the holiday. The 78-year-old billionaire had dismissed his entire staff for Christmas Eve, something he had done every year for the past decade since his wife Margaret passed away. The silence in the 40-room mansion was deafening. Theodore's children lived across the country, too busy with their own lives and families to visit their father during the holidays. His son Marcus ran the family's West Coast operations and hadn't spoken to him in 6 months after a business disagreement. His daughter Sarah lived in London with her husband and 2 children, sending only a Christmas card this year with a brief note about being too busy to travel. Theodore pushed away the plate of roasted turkey and walked to his study, his footsteps echoing through the marble hallways. The walls were lined with photographs from better times, family gatherings, business achievements, charity events where Margaret had stood beside him, smiling and graceful. Now those photos felt like ghosts mocking his current loneliness. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat behind his massive oak desk, looking at the stack of Christmas cards from business associates and employees. Each one contained the same polite, empty wishes for the season. None of them knew him as anything more than their wealthy boss or business partner. He wondered when his life had become so isolated, so devoid of genuine human connection. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times, marking another hour of Christmas Eve passing by in solitude. Theodore remembered when this house had been filled with laughter during the holidays. Margaret would spend weeks decorating every room, and their children would run through the halls with excitement. Now the decorations felt hollow, put up by staff who followed the same routine every year without any real joy or meaning behind them. A sudden power outage plunged the mansion into darkness. The backup generator would kick in soon, but, for now, Theodore sat in complete blackness, listening to the wind howling outside. The storm had grown stronger, and he could hear tree branches scraping against the windows. In all his years of wealth and success, he had never felt smaller or more insignificant than he did in this moment. The doorbell rang through the darkness, its sound so unexpected that Theodore almost thought he had imagined it. Who would be out in this weather on Christmas Eve? He made his way carefully to the front door, using the flashlight from his phone to navigate the familiar hallways. Through the frosted glass panels beside the massive oak door, he could see 2 figures huddled together against the storm. Theodore hesitated before opening the door. His security system was down due to the power outage, and he lived alone in this isolated mansion. But something about the smaller figure clinging to the larger one made him turn the heavy brass handle. Standing on his doorstep were a woman and a young girl, both soaking wet and shivering uncontrollably. The woman appeared to be in her early 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair that clung to her face. She wore a simple coat that was clearly not designed for this kind of weather, and her shoes were completely soaked through. The little girl, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, pressed close to her mother's side, her tiny frame trembling with cold. "I'm so sorry to bother you, sir," the woman said, her voice shaking from the cold. "Our car broke down about a mile from here, and my daughter and I have been walking in the storm. I saw your lights and hoped." She trailed off, clearly embarrassed to be asking for help from a stranger. Theodore looked past them into the blizzard and saw no other houses nearby. His mansion sat on 50 acres of private land, surrounded by woods and hills. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the main road was even further. These 2 would never survive the night out in this weather. "Come inside immediately," he said, stepping back to let them enter. "You'll catch pneumonia out there." The woman hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable about imposing on a stranger's Christmas. "We don't want to intrude on your holiday, sir. If you could just let us use your phone to call for help." "Nonsense," Theodore said firmly. "The phone lines are down, and even if they weren't, no tow truck is coming out in this storm tonight. Come in and get warm." As they stepped into the grand foyer, Theodore got his first good look at his unexpected guests. The woman had the bearing of someone who worked hard for everything she had. Her clothes were clean but worn, and despite her obvious exhaustion and cold, she maintained a dignity that reminded him of his own mother, who had worked multiple jobs to support their family before his business success. The little girl stayed close to her mother, her big brown eyes taking in the opulent surroundings with wonder and a touch of fear. She had never seen anything like this mansion, with its marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "I'm Theodore Whitmore," he said, extending his hand to the woman. "And you are?" "Grace Washington," she replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip despite her shivering. "And this is my daughter Lily. We're truly grateful for your kindness, Mr. Whitmore." Theodore knelt down to Lily's level, his expression softening as he looked at the frightened child. "Hello, Lily. Are you very cold?" She nodded silently, still clinging to her mother's coat. Theodore could see that she was trying to be brave, but her lips were blue and her small body was shaking uncontrollably. "Let's get you both into some dry clothes and warm you up," Theodore said, standing. "Grace, I have a housekeeper who's about your size, and I'm sure we can find something for Lily as well." As they made their way through the mansion, the backup generator finally kicked in, flooding the hallways with light. Grace gasped softly at the grandeur around her. The priceless artwork, the elaborate furnishings, the sheer scale of wealth displayed in every room. "You have a beautiful home," she said quietly, clearly overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. Theodore found himself seeing his house through her eyes and feeling almost embarrassed by the excess. "It's too big for one person," he admitted. "My wife used to say we could house half the city in here." He led them to the guest wing, where he found clothes for them both. For Grace, he retrieved items from his housekeeper's room, knowing she wouldn't mind. For Lily, he had to be more creative, finding some of his grandson's clothes that had been left behind during a rare visit 2 years ago. While they changed, Theodore went to the kitchen and prepared hot chocolate and soup. It had been years since he had cooked anything himself, but he managed to heat up some of the leftover Christmas dinner and make the hot drinks. The simple act of preparing food for others felt strange and satisfying in a way he hadn't expected. When Grace and Lily emerged wearing dry clothes, they looked much better, though still shaken by their experience in the storm. Lily had warmed up enough to show some curiosity about her surroundings, though she still stayed close to her mother. "Please, sit and eat something warm," Theodore said, gesturing to the breakfast nook where he had set up their meal. The formal dining room felt too imposing for this situation. As they ate, Grace gradually opened up about their circumstances. She worked as a cleaning lady for several office buildings in the city, taking multiple jobs to support herself and Lily after her husband died in a construction accident 3 years earlier. They had been driving to her sister's house for Christmas dinner when their old car finally gave up in the storm. "I've been saving for a new car," she explained, "but every time I get close to having enough, something else comes up. Lily needed new school clothes, or the rent went up, or she got sick and missed school." She looked at her daughter with obvious love and concern. "I just want to give her a stable life." Theodore found himself genuinely interested in their story. When was the last time someone had talked to him about real problems, genuine struggles that couldn't be solved by writing a check? His world had become so insulated by wealth that he had forgotten what it was like to worry about basic necessities. Lily, emboldened by the warm food and her mother's conversation, began to look around with more curiosity. "Do you live here all by yourself?" she asked Theodore with the directness that only children possess. "Yes, I do," he replied, surprised by how sad that sounded when he said it aloud. "Doesn't it get lonely?" she continued, ignoring her mother's gentle attempt to quiet her. "Sometimes," Theodore admitted, touched by the child's innocent concern. "Do you get lonely, Lily?" "Sometimes," she said, echoing his words. "But Mama says that's when we need to find ways to help other people, because helping others makes us feel less alone." Grace looked embarrassed by her daughter's boldness. "Lily, Mr. Whitmore doesn't need advice from an 8-year-old. But Theodore was struck by the simple wisdom in the child's words. When had he last helped someone without expecting something in return? When had he last done something simply because it was right, rather than because it would benefit his business or his reputation? As the evening progressed, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The wind continued to howl outside, and the snow was accumulating so rapidly that even if their car could be fixed, the roads would be impassable until morning at the earliest. You'll have to stay the night, Theodore said matter-of-factly. I have plenty of guest rooms, and it's not safe for anyone to be out in this weather. Grace protested, uncomfortable with imposing further on a stranger's generosity, but Theodore was insistent. I won't hear of anything else. Besides, he added with a slight smile, it's been a long time since this house has had Christmas guests. As he showed them to a guest suite, complete with a bedroom for Grace and an adjoining room for Lily, Theodore realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't dreading the passage of time during the holidays. The presence of these two unexpected visitors had somehow filled a void he hadn't even realized existed. Lily's wonder at everything in the guest rooms, the four-poster bed, the marble bathroom, the view of the snow-covered gardens, reminded Theodore of his own children when they were young. Before wealth had become a barrier between him and genuine relationships, before success had isolated him from the simple joys of human connection. After settling his guests for the night, Theodore returned to his study, but found himself unable to concentrate on anything. The silence that had oppressed him earlier was gone, replaced by the comforting knowledge that he wasn't alone in the vast mansion. He could hear Grace helping Lily get ready for bed, their quiet voices carrying through the halls like a lullaby he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He walked to his bedroom window, and Luke Christmas morning arrived with a brilliant sun that made the snow-covered estate sparkle like diamonds. Theodore woke earlier than usual, energized by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a pristine winter landscape and roads that would need hours of plowing before they became passable. He dressed carefully and made his way to the kitchen, where he began preparing breakfast from scratch. It had been decades since he had cooked a meal himself, but muscle memory from his youth, when his family couldn't afford hired help, gradually returned. He found himself humming while he worked, mixing pancake batter and brewing coffee with an attention to detail that surprised him. The sound of footsteps on the marble floors announced the arrival of his guests. Lily appeared first, her eyes bright with excitement as she took in the transformed view outside the windows. Behind her, Grace walked more cautiously, clearly still uncomfortable with their situation despite Theodore's obvious hospitality. "Merry Christmas," Theodore called out, his voice warmer than it had been in years. "I hope you both slept well." "Like angels," Grace replied, though her tone carried the weight of someone who rarely allowed herself to rest completely. "The beds were more comfortable than anything we've ever experienced. Thank you again for your kindness." Lily ran to the window, pressing her nose against the glass. "It looks like a fairy tale out there," she exclaimed. "Mama, look how pretty everything is." Theodore watched the child's unbridled joy and felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was permanently dormant. When had he stopped seeing beauty in simple things? When had the snow become just an inconvenience rather than a source of wonder? "Would you like to see the gardens after breakfast?" he offered. "I have boots and coats that should fit you both." Grace started to protest about imposing further, but Lily's enthusiastic yes overrode her mother's concerns. Theodore smiled at the child's excitement, remembering how his own children had once responded to snow with the same unbridled joy. Over breakfast, Theodore learned more about their lives. Grace had grown up in a small farming community, the youngest of 6 children. She had worked her way through community college while raising Lily alone, always putting her daughter's needs before her own ambitions. Her husband David had been a good man who worked construction to support his family, but his death in a workplace accident had left them struggling financially and emotionally. David always said that life was about the people you help along the way, Grace shared, watching Lily attack her stack of pancakes with enthusiasm. He used to volunteer at the community center, teaching kids how to build things with their hands. Lily barely remembers him, but I try to keep his values alive through how I raise her. Theodore found himself genuinely moved by this woman's strength. She had faced challenges that would have broken many people, yet she had maintained her dignity and continued to instill positive values in her daughter. How different his own response to loss had been, retreating into isolation and bitterness instead of finding ways to honor Margaret's memory through connection with others. "What about you, Mr. Whitmore?" Lily asked with the directness that had charmed him the night before. "Do you have any kids?" "I have 2 children," he replied carefully. "But they're grown up now, with families of their own. They live far away and are very busy with their own lives. Don't they visit you? Lily pressed, innocent of the pain her question caused. Not very often, Theodore admitted. We don't get along as well as we used to. Grace recognized the sadness in his voice and gently changed the subject, but Theodore could see her filing away this information. She was the kind of person who noticed when others were hurting, even when they tried to hide it. After breakfast, they bundled up in winter gear that Theodore retrieved from various closets throughout the mansion. Watching Grace help Lily into snow boots that were slightly too big, adjusting scarves, and mittens with the practiced efficiency of a mother, reminded Theodore of similar scenes from his own children's youth. Margaret had always been the one to manage those details while he was busy with business calls or reviewing financial reports. The tour of the gardens revealed a winter wonderland that even Theodore had forgotten existed on his own property. The formal gardens, usually maintained by a team of landscapers, had been transformed by the snow into something magical. Ancient oak trees bore heavy mantles of white, and the ornate fountain in the center had become a sculpture of ice and snow. Lily's wonder was infectious. She had never seen gardens like these, with their carefully planned pathways, sculpted hedges, and hidden alcoves designed for quiet contemplation. She ran from one discovery to another, calling for her mother and Theodore to see each new marvel. "Can we build a snowman?" she asked, her breath creating small clouds in the crisp air. Theodore couldn't remember the last time he had built a snowman. Probably not since his own children were small. But something about Lily's excitement made it impossible to refuse. "Of course," he said, "but it will have to be a very special snowman, worthy of these gardens." What followed was an hour of pure joy that Theodore would later remember as one of the best Christmas mornings of his life. Grace and Lily worked together to roll massive snowballs while Theodore found himself genuinely laughing for the first time in months. When they needed accessories for their creation, he raided his own closets, donating an expensive cashmere scarf and a hat that had cost more than Grace made in a week. The finished snowman was indeed special, tall, and elegant, with carefully positioned features and Theodore's designer accessories giving him a distinguished air. Lily insisted on taking pictures with Theodore's phone, posing with their creation and insisting that Theodore be in every shot. As they headed back inside, Theodore found himself reluctant to end their outdoor adventure. The simple pleasure of playing in the snow with Grace and Lily had reminded him of what he had been missing in his isolated existence. Work and wealth had become his entire world, but these simple moments of human connection felt more valuable than any business deal he had ever made. Inside, they warmed themselves by the fireplace in the main living room. Theodore had lit it himself, another skill he had rediscovered from his youth. As they sat together, Grace sharing stories of Christmas celebrations in her childhood home, Theodore realized he was experiencing something he had forgotten existed, contentment that had nothing to do with achievement or acquisition. "Mama used to make the whole house smell like cinnamon and apples," Grace was saying. "She'd start baking days before Christmas, and all us kids would sneak into the kitchen trying to steal tastes of cookie dough." She smiled at the memory. "I try to do the same for Lily, though our little apartment doesn't hold smells the way that old farmhouse did." Theodore found himself sharing his own memories, stories about Margaret's elaborate Christmas preparations, and the way she had made their house feel like a warm refuge from the business pressures that constantly demanded his attention. He realized he hadn't talked about Margaret to anyone in years, had locked away those memories because they were too painful to revisit alone. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Grace said gently. "She was," Theodore replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I just wish I had appreciated her more while she was alive. I was always so focused on building the business, on providing for the family financially, that I forgot to actually be present with them." Lily, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation while drawing pictures on paper Theodore had provided, suddenly looked up. "My daddy died too," she said matter-of-factly. "But Mama says he's still with us when we remember the good things about him and try to be like him." The simple wisdom from an 8-year-old hit Theodore harder than any business rival's criticism ever had. He had spent so much time mourning what he had lost that he had forgotten to honor what he had gained from his years with Margaret. As the afternoon wore on, Theodore found himself studying Grace more carefully. She had an inner strength that came from facing real hardship and emerging with her values intact. She listened more than she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and showed genuine interest in others, qualities that had become rare in Theodore's world of business relationships and social climbing. When Lily fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from their morning adventure, Grace carefully covered her with a throw blanket and sat back down. The quiet moment gave Theodore an opportunity to really look at this woman who had appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was making. "Grace," he said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" She nodded, though her expression showed some wariness. "Are you happy?" The question surprised even Theodore with its directness. Grace considered the question seriously before answering. "That's a complicated question for someone in my situation," she said finally. "I'm grateful for what I have, especially for Lily. I love her more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. But happy? I think happiness is a luxury I can't afford to think about too much." Her honesty struck him deeply. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter about her circumstances, yet she had maintained a grace and dignity that put his own response to life's challenges to shame. "What about you?" she asked, turning the question back to him. "You have everything that most people think would make someone happy. Are you happy?" Theodore was quiet for a long time before answering. "No," he said finally. "I don't think I have been for years. I've been successful, I've been wealthy, I've been respected. But happy? I'm not even sure I remember what that feels like anymore." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the winter sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds. Theodore realized that this was the first Christmas in years where he hadn't spent the entire day thinking about business or dwelling on his isolation. "The road should be clear enough for travel tomorrow morning," he said eventually, though the prospect of their departure filled him with unexpected sadness. Grace set down her fork and looked at Theodore with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. In her experience, propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well for people in her situation. What kind of proposition? Theodore had rehearsed this conversation in his mind all afternoon. But now, faced with Grace's direct gaze and Lily's innocent attention, he felt nervous in a way that boardroom presentations had never made him feel. "I've been thinking about what you said, about your work situation and your goals for Lily's future," he began carefully. "I also can't stop thinking about what you said about helping others, making us feel less alone." Grace remained silent, waiting for him to continue, her protective instincts clearly on alert. "I need a household manager," Theodore said. "Someone to oversee the staff when they return, to manage the day-to-day operations of this place, to make it feel like a home again instead of just a building." He paused, gathering courage for the next part. "I'd like you to consider taking the position." Grace blinked, clearly not having expected this direction. "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate the thought, but I clean office buildings. I don't have experience managing household staff or—" "You raised a remarkable daughter while working multiple jobs and dealing with tragedy," Theodore interrupted gently. "You've managed more complex situations than most people ever face. The skills are transferable: organization, attention to detail, the ability to coordinate multiple responsibilities. Most importantly, you understand what it means to create a real home." Lily looked back and forth between the adults, sensing the importance of the conversation without fully understanding its implications. "The position would come with a substantial salary," Theodore continued. "More than you're making now with all your jobs combined. Plus health insurance, housing either here in the guest wing or in the manager's cottage on the property, and an education fund for Lily that would cover her schooling through college." Grace's eyes widened at the scope of what he was offering. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this for people you just met?" Theodore had asked himself the same question throughout the afternoon. The practical answer was that he genuinely did need someone to manage his household, someone who could bring warmth and life back to the empty mansion. But the deeper truth was more personal and harder to articulate. "Because in 2 days, you and Lily have reminded me of things I had forgotten," he said finally. "You've shown me what it means to have a real home, not just an expensive house. You've reminded me that wealth means nothing if you have no one to share it with." He looked at Lily, who was listening intently despite her young age. And because I think Lily deserves every opportunity in life, and I'm in a position to help make that happen. Grace was quiet for a long time, clearly weighing the offer. Theodore could see the conflict in her expression, hope warring with caution, dreams fighting against the fear of being disappointed. There would be conditions, she said finally. Of course. What would they be? I won't be anyone's charity case, Grace said firmly. If I take this job, it's because I'm qualified to do it well, not because you feel sorry for me. I'll earn my salary and expect to be held to the same standards as any other employee. Theodore nodded, respecting her pride. Agreed. And Lily comes first, Grace continued. Always. If there's ever a conflict between the job and what's best for my daughter, she wins. I wouldn't have it any other way, Theodore replied. In fact, I'd be disappointed if you felt differently. Grace looked at her daughter, who was watching the conversation with bright, intelligent eyes. What do you think, sweetheart? Would you like to live somewhere like this? Lily's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Could I really? Could I have my own room and play in those gardens every day? Then, with the consideration that often surprised adults, she added, But what about your other jobs, Mama? Won't those people need you to clean their offices? Grace smiled at her daughter's concern for others. There are other people who can do those jobs, baby. And this would be a better job for Mama, one where we could spend more time together. Theodore watched this exchange with growing certainty that he was making the right decision. This wasn't charity. This was an investment in the kind of family that could bring life back to his empty mansion and meaning back to his isolated existence. I'll need time to think about it, Grace said. This is a big decision, and I don't want to make it lightly. Take all the time you need, Theodore assured her. But I hope you'll consider it seriously. I think it could be good for all of us. The next morning brought the road crews, as Theodore had predicted. The main roads were clear enough for travel, and Grace's car had been towed to a local garage overnight. The mechanic called to report that the repairs would be extensive and expensive, more than the old vehicle was worth. Don't worry about the car, Theodore told Grace when she received the news. I'll handle it. Mr. Whitmore, I can't let you. You can and you will, he said firmly but kindly. Consider it a Christmas gift. Besides, you'll need reliable transportation if you decide to take the job. While Grace wrestled with accepting his help, Theodore found himself making other arrangements. He called his lawyer to begin setting up the education fund he had promised for Lily. He contacted his human resources department to begin preparing the employment paperwork for Grace's position. Most importantly, he called his housekeeper, Maria, to explain the situation and get her input on transitioning her responsibilities to a household manager. Maria, who had worked for the family for 15 years, was initially skeptical. Mr. Theodore, you haven't needed a household manager before. Why now? Because I'm tired of living in a museum, Maria, he said honestly. I want this place to feel like a home again. I need someone who understands what that means. Maria was quiet for a moment. This woman and her daughter, they are special to you. It wasn't a question, and Theodore didn't treat it like one. Yes, they are. They've reminded me of things I had forgotten about what's important in life. Then, I will help, Maria said simply. If they make you happy, then I will help them succeed. That afternoon, Theodore took Grace and Lily on a complete tour of the property, showing them not just the main house but the grounds, the cottages, and the various outbuildings. He explained the current staffing situation, the gardeners, the cleaning crew, the occasional caterers for business events, the maintenance workers who kept everything running smoothly. The household manager would coordinate all of this, he explained as they walked through the main house. Making sure everything runs smoothly, managing schedules, overseeing special events. It's a big job, but not overwhelming with the right support system. Grace asked thoughtful questions about the responsibilities, the current staff, and Theodore's expectations. Her questions revealed a sharp mind and an intuitive understanding of what the job would entail. More importantly, her suggestions about improvements and efficiencies showed that she was already thinking about the position seriously. Lily, meanwhile, had claimed the gardens as her future kingdom. She showed Theodore and her mother where she would build snow forts in winter and flower gardens in spring. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Theodore found himself seeing his property through her eyes, not as an expensive showcase, but as a place where a child could grow and explore and learn. That evening, as they prepared for what might be their last dinner together, Grace made her decision. "I'll take the job," she said simply, "but I want to start with a trial period. 3 months for both of us to see if this arrangement works." Theodore felt a surge of relief and joy that surprised him with its intensity. 3 months is perfect, he agreed. "When can you start?" "I'll need 2 weeks to wrap up my current jobs and give proper notice," Grace said. "I won't leave people in the lurch, even for a better opportunity." Her consideration for her current employers, even minimum wage positions that offered no security, only reinforced Theodore's certainty that he was making the right choice. This was someone with integrity and character, someone who understood loyalty and responsibility. "There's one more thing," Grace said. "I want to earn this position. I'll spend the next 2 weeks researching household management, talking to professionals in the field, making sure I'm prepared to do the job well." Theodore smiled at her thoroughness. "I'll arrange for you to speak with some people I know in the industry, and Maria has offered to help with the transition." As they finalized the details of Grace's employment, Theodore felt something he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for the future. For the first time since Margaret's death, he had something to look forward to that wasn't related to business or financial achievement. That night, after Grace and Lily had gone to bed, Theodore sat in his study and called his son Marcus in California. They hadn't spoken since their argument 6 months earlier, and the conversation started stiffly. "Dad, is everything okay? It's late there." "Everything's fine," Theodore said. "I just wanted to tell you about something that happened, and to apologize for some things that are long overdue." What followed was the longest and most honest conversation Theodore had had with his son in years. He told Marcus about Grace and Lily, about the reminder they had given him of what really mattered in life. He apologized for the years of putting business before family, for the cold distance that had grown between them. Marcus was quiet for a long time after Theodore finished speaking. "Dad," he said finally, "I've been waiting for this conversation for 10 years. I'm glad you found your way back to yourself." "I want you to come meet them," Theodore said. "Bring the kids, bring Jennifer. I want this house to be full of family again." The 2 weeks that followed were transformative for everyone involved. Grace threw herself into preparation for her new role with the same determination that had carried her through years of struggle. She spent hours researching household management, studying everything from staff coordination to event planning. Theodore arranged for her to shadow 2 professional household managers from other prominent families, and their reports back to him were glowing. "She asks the right questions," reported Mrs. Hartford, who managed a similar estate in Connecticut. "More importantly, she listens to the answers and thinks about how to apply them to her specific situation. She has natural leadership abilities and the kind of personal warmth that makes staff want to please her rather than fear disappointing her." Meanwhile, Theodore found himself preparing his own life for the changes ahead. He had lived as a hermit for so long that the prospect of sharing his space, even professionally, required adjustment. He cleared out rooms that had been serving as storage areas, making space for Grace and Lily to truly make the guest wing their home. More significantly, he began the process of reconnecting with his own family. His conversation with Marcus had opened a door that had been closed for years, and they spoke regularly during those 2 weeks, planning Marcus's visit and rebuilding their relationship one careful conversation at a time. Sarah proved more resistant to reconciliation, but even she seemed cautiously intrigued by the changes she heard in her father's voice. "You sound different, Dad," she told him during one of their brief calls. "Lighter somehow. Less angry." "I feel different," Theodore admitted. "For the first time in years, I'm looking forward to tomorrow instead of just getting through today." On the day Grace and Lily were scheduled to return, Theodore found himself pacing the mansion with nervous energy. He had arranged for professional movers to handle their belongings, though Grace had insisted she didn't have much to move. He had also taken the liberty of having the manager's cottage completely renovated, though he hoped they would choose to stay in the main house, where there would be more interaction. When the car pulled up to the front entrance, Theodore was waiting on the steps like an eager child. Lily burst from the back seat and ran toward him, her excitement infectious and genuine. "Mr. Theodore," she called, using the name she had decided on during their brief time together. "We're back. Mama says this is our home now." Behind her, Grace emerged more slowly, but Theodore could see the resolve in her posture. She had made this decision completely and was ready to commit to making it work. "Welcome home," Theodore said, and meant it more than any words he had spoken in years. The first few days of the new arrangement revealed both the challenges and the rewards of Theodore's decision. Grace approached her new responsibilities with meticulous care, spending time with each member of the existing staff to understand their roles and concerns. Rather than imposing immediate changes, she observed and asked questions, gradually earning respect through competence and consideration. Maria, initially skeptical of having her authority shifted to a newcomer, became Grace's strongest advocate within the first week. "She doesn't try to show off how much she knows," Maria explained to Theodore. "She learns from each of us and makes us feel valued, not threatened." Lily's presence in the mansion was like watching sunlight slowly fill a space that had been dark for too long. Her laughter echoed through hallways that had known only silence. Her endless curiosity led to discoveries of treasures that had been forgotten in storage rooms and closets. Most importantly, her innocent questions and observations continued to challenge Theodore to see his life from new perspectives. "Why do you eat dinner alone in that big room?" she asked one evening, referring to the formal dining room where Theodore had been taking his solitary meals for years. "I suppose I never thought about it," Theodore admitted. "Mama says dinner is for talking about your day and sharing stories," Lily continued with 8-year-old logic. "How can you do that by yourself?" That night marked the beginning of a new tradition. Theodore, Grace, and Lily began sharing dinner together in the smaller breakfast room, and those conversations became the highlight of Theodore's days. Grace proved to be an intelligent and thoughtful conversationalist, while Lily's presence kept the mood light and joyful. As Grace settled into her role, Theodore was amazed by the subtle but significant changes she brought to the household. The mansion gradually transformed from a showcase of wealth into a comfortable home. Fresh flowers appeared in lived-in rooms rather than just the formal areas that visitors might see. The staff seemed more relaxed and engaged, responding to Grace's collaborative leadership style. More importantly, Grace had an intuitive understanding of how to balance Theodore's need for privacy with his growing desire for human connection. She managed the household efficiently while creating opportunities for meaningful interaction without being intrusive. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Marcus arrived for his promised New Year's visit, bringing his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage children. Theodore was nervous about the reunion, uncertain how his son would react to the changes in his life and living situation. Marcus's first meeting with Grace and Lily took place in the main living room, where Grace was reviewing household schedules while Lily did homework at a nearby table. Theodore watched anxiously as his son assessed the woman who had become such an important part of his father's life. "So you're the miracle worker," Marcus said to Grace with a wry smile. "The person who managed to get my father to smile again." Grace bristled slightly at the characterization. "Your father doesn't need fixing," she replied with quiet dignity. "He just needed reminding that he's not alone in the world." Marcus's expression softened at her response, and Theodore felt a surge of pride in Grace's refusal to accept credit she didn't deserve or to diminish his autonomy. The visit that followed exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus's teenagers, initially skeptical about their grandfather's new living arrangement, were quickly charmed by Lily's enthusiasm and Grace's genuine warmth. Jennifer, who had always struggled with Theodore's formal, distant manner, found herself relaxing in the more comfortable atmosphere that Grace had created. Most significantly, Marcus saw firsthand how his father had changed. Theodore was more present, more engaged, more willing to listen and share. The conversations that had been stilted and business-focused for years became natural and personal. "I haven't seen him like this since before Mom died," Marcus confided to Grace during a private moment. "Whatever you're doing, please keep doing it." "I'm not doing anything special," Grace insisted. "I'm just being myself and letting him be himself. Sometimes that's enough." The New Year's celebration was the first party the mansion had hosted in years. Rather than the elaborate, formal affairs that Theodore had once favored, this was a simple family gathering. Grace coordinated the meal preparation with help from Maria and the catering staff, but the focus was on comfort and connection rather than impressive. As midnight approached, the expanded family gathered in the main living room. Theodore looked around at his son and daughter-in-law, his grandchildren, Grace and Lily, and felt a contentment he had thought was gone forever. When the clock struck 12, marking the beginning of a new year, Theodore made a resolution that would have surprised the bitter, lonely man he had been just weeks earlier. He resolved to continue growing, to keep building connections, to honor Margaret's memory by living fully rather than just surviving. After Marcus's family returned to California, the household settled into new rhythms that incorporated the best elements of their visit. Theodore began planning for Sarah's spring visit, hopeful that the example of his reconciliation with Marcus would encourage her to open similar doors. Grace continued to excel in her role, proving that Theodore's instincts about her capabilities had been correct. She managed a complex household with efficiency and grace, but, more importantly, she had helped transform it back into a home. Lily thrived in her new environment. The security of stable housing and her mother's improved income allowed her personality to flourish. She excelled in her new school, made friends easily, and continued to bring joy to everyone around her with her curiosity and kindness. But perhaps the most significant change was in Theodore himself. The bitter isolation that had defined his life for years was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection that extended beyond his immediate household. He began volunteering at the community center where Grace had mentioned her late husband had once taught children. Following David's example, Theodore started a program teaching young people about business and entrepreneurship, sharing his knowledge and experience in ways that honored both David's memory and his own desire to give back. 1 year later, the Whitmore mansion hummed with life in ways that would have been unimaginable during Theodore's years of isolation. The approaching Christmas season brought back memories of that fateful storm, but now those memories were filled with gratitude rather than loneliness. Grace had not only succeeded in her role as household manager, but had exceeded every expectation Theodore had harbored when he first offered her the position. Under her guidance, the mansion had become a place where people wanted to work, where staff felt valued and respected, and where every room served a purpose beyond mere display. The most visible evidence of the transformation was the guest registry that Grace maintained. Throughout the year, the mansion had welcomed Marcus's family for spring break, Sarah and her children for a month-long summer visit that marked the full healing of that relationship, business colleagues for dinners that felt more like friendly gatherings than corporate obligations, and various friends that Grace and Lily had brought into their extended circle. Lily, now 9 years old, had blossomed in ways that continually amazed Theodore. Her academic performance in the excellent private school that Theodore's education fund had made possible was outstanding, but, more importantly, she had maintained the kindness and curiosity that made her such a joy to be around. Her influence on the household staff was remarkable. She remembered everyone's birthdays, asked about their families, and somehow made each person feel special in her presence. "That child has a gift," Maria often said. "She sees people, really sees them. It's rare, even in adults." Theodore had to agree. Lily had a way of connecting with people that reminded him powerfully of Margaret in her prime. But where Margaret's gift had been refined through years of social experience, Lily's was natural and unconscious, making it all the more powerful. The community center program that Theodore had started had grown into something that surprised everyone involved. What had begun as a few evening sessions teaching basic business concepts to teenagers had evolved into a comprehensive mentorship program that paired successful professionals with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Grace had been instrumental in this expansion, using her connections from her previous work to identify kids who could benefit most from the program. Her understanding of the challenges facing working families gave the program an authenticity that made it incredibly effective. "These kids don't need charity," she had explained to Theodore early in the program's development. "They need opportunity and someone who believes in their potential. Your job isn't to save them. It's to show them what's possible and give them the tools to get there themselves." This philosophy had shaped the program's approach and contributed to its remarkable success rate. Dozens of young people had gone on to college scholarships, trade programs, or successful businesses, carrying with them not just practical skills, but a sense of self-worth that had been fostered through genuine relationship and earned achievement. Theodore's own transformation had continued throughout the year. The bitter, isolated man who had spent Christmas alone just 12 months earlier was now someone his own family barely recognized. Marcus and Jennifer had remarked during their recent visit that Theodore seemed 20 years younger, not just in appearance but in spirit and energy. The reconciliation with Sarah had been perhaps the most meaningful development of all. Their relationship, damaged by years of misunderstanding and mutual hurt, had required careful rebuilding. But Sarah's willingness to try, inspired partly by Marcus's example and partly by her curiosity about the changes she heard in her father's voice, had led to genuine healing. During her summer visit, Sarah had spent long evenings talking with Theodore about their shared memories of Margaret and their mutual grief over paths not taken in their relationship. Those conversations, often facilitated by Grace's gentle presence and wisdom, had cleared away years of accumulated resentment and disappointment. "I had forgotten that my father used to be funny," Sarah confided to Grace during that visit. "Growing up, before the business became everything, he used to tell the most amazing stories and make us laugh until our sides hurt. I thought that person was gone forever. He was just buried under a lot of pain," Grace replied. "People don't disappear, they just sometimes forget who they are. Your father needed to remember that he's more than his work, more than his wealth. He needed to remember that he's loved for who he is, not what he provides." As Christmas approached again, Theodore found himself reflecting on the year's journey with deep satisfaction. Not everything had been smooth. There had been adjustments, misunderstandings, and moments when the arrangement had seemed fragile. But each challenge had been met and overcome, strengthening the bonds between all members of their unusual household family. Grace had proven herself not just as a household manager, but as a friend and advisor whose judgment Theodore trusted completely. Their relationship had evolved naturally from employer and employee to something much deeper, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine caring for each other's welfare. There had been moments throughout the year when Theodore wondered if his feelings for Grace were becoming romantic. She was intelligent, beautiful, and possessed a strength of character that he found incredibly attractive. But he had been careful not to let such feelings complicate their arrangement, recognizing that Grace's security and Lily's welfare depended on maintaining appropriate boundaries. Grace, for her part, seemed content with their current relationship. She had never shown any interest in romantic involvement, and Theodore respected her focus on her daughter and her career. Their friendship was precious enough without risking it for possibilities that might exist only in his imagination. The week before Christmas, Theodore received news that filled him with excitement. Marcus called to announce that he and Jennifer were expecting another child, and that they wanted to spend Christmas at the mansion so that Theodore could be part of this special time. Sarah followed with her own announcement. She and her family would be joining them for the holidays, making it the first time in over a decade that the entire Whitmore family would be together for Christmas. "It's going to be chaos," Grace warned Theodore as they planned for the influx of family members. "Are you sure you're ready for a house full of children and all the noise and confusion that comes with them?" Theodore's smile was answer enough. The man who had once dreaded the holidays now couldn't wait for his house to be filled with the sound of his grandchildren's laughter. The days leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of preparation. Grace coordinated everything with her usual efficiency, but this time the work felt joyful rather than burdensome. Lily threw herself into helping with decorations, her excitement infectious as she planned activities for her soon-to-arrive cousins. Theodore found himself remembering Margaret's elaborate Christmas preparations and felt grateful rather than sad. This celebration would be different from those she had orchestrated, but it would be no less meaningful. In some ways, it felt like the fulfillment of dreams she had harbored but never seen realized. The dream of grandchildren filling the house, of family relationships healed and strengthened, of their home being a place where love was celebrated. When Christmas Eve arrived, the mansion buzzed with activity. Marcus and Jennifer had arrived with their teenagers, and Jennifer's pregnancy glow. Sarah and her family brought energy and laughter that filled every corner of the house. The grandchildren, ranging in age from 6 to 16, created a wonderful chaos that reminded Theodore of how alive a house could feel when filled with young people. That evening, as the extended family gathered around the fireplace in the main living room, Theodore looked around at faces he loved and felt a contentment that surpassed anything his business success had ever provided. Grace and Lily sat nearby, integral parts of this family circle though not bound to it by blood. "Grandfather," said Marcus's youngest, a precocious 6-year-old named Emma, "will you tell us a story?" Theodore smiled, remembering Sarah's comment about his storytelling abilities. "What kind of story would you like?" "A Christmas story," Emma replied immediately. "A true one." Theodore looked at Grace and Lily, then at his children and grandchildren gathered around him. "I know the perfect story," he said. "It's about a lonely old man who thought Christmas was just another day, until a storm brought him exactly what he needed most." As he told the story of that Christmas Eve 1 year ago, of Grace and Lily's arrival and the transformation that followed, Theodore realized that he was narrating not just past events, but an ongoing miracle. The storm that had brought Grace and Lily to his door had indeed brought him what he needed most. Not just companionship, but purpose, not just friendship, but family, not just wealth, but richness of spirit. When he finished the story, the room was quiet for a moment before Emma spoke up again. "Is that really true, Grandfather?" "Every word," Theodore assured her. "So Grace and Lily saved you?" Theodore looked at the two people who had changed his life so completely. "We saved each other," he said softly. As the evening wound down and family members began heading to their rooms, Grace approached Theodore in the now quiet living room. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a stranger," she replied. "For giving Lily and me not just a job and a home, but a real family. For showing us that kindness still exists in the world." Theodore shook his head. "I should be thanking you. You gave me my life back." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the snow beginning to fall outside the windows. Another Christmas Eve storm was beginning, but this time Theodore felt no dread at the weather. His house was full of love, his heart was full of gratitude, and his future was full of possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked Grace. "Giving up your independence to work for a stubborn old billionaire?" Grace smiled, the same gentle expression that had captured his heart that first night. "Never," she said firmly. "This isn't about working for you, Theodore. This is about building something together, a family, a home, a life that honors the best in all of us." As she headed upstairs to check on Lily and ensure all the guest rooms were comfortable, Theodore remained by the window, watching the snow fall and marveling at how completely his life had changed. 1 year ago, he had been the richest man in the region and the loneliest. Tonight, he was surrounded by love, laughter, and the promise of tomorrow. The storm outside was beautiful now rather than threatening. It reminded him that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disruptions, that sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning, and that sometimes the very thing we fear most, opening our doors to strangers, is exactly what we need to find our way home. Theodore Whitmore, billionaire and patriarch, was finally, truly rich. "David would have liked you," Grace told him one evening after he returned from the center, energized by his work with the kids. "He always said that wisdom without kindness is just selfishness, and kindness without wisdom is just sentiment. You're finding the balance." As winter gave way to spring, Theodore reflected on how completely his life had changed. The arrival of Grace and Lily during that Christmas Eve storm had been the catalyst for transformation that went far beyond their immediate impact on his daily routine. He had reconnected with his children, found purpose in helping others, and discovered that true wealth lay not in accumulation but in connection. Most importantly, he had learned that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the person you were meant to be. The mansion that had once been a monument to his success and a prison of his loneliness had become a true home, filled with laughter and purpose and the kinds of relationships that give life meaning. And it all began with a simple act of kindness on a stormy Christmas Eve, when a lonely billionaire opened his door to two strangers seeking shelter and found that they had been sent to shelter him from something far more devastating than any winter storm. "We'll be there for New Year's," Marcus promised. "I can't wait to meet the people who helped my father remember how to be happy." After hanging up with Marcus, Theodore called Sarah in London. That conversation was more difficult. The wounds between them ran deeper, but it ended with a tentative plan for her to visit in the spring with her family. As Theodore prepared for bed, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 days. The arrival of Grace and Lily had been like a stone thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that were already transforming everything around them. Tomorrow, they would leave to wrap up their old lives, but in 2 weeks, they would return to begin something new. Theodore would no longer be alone in his vast mansion. More importantly, he would no longer be alone with his memories and regrets. For the first time in years, Theodore Whitmore was genuinely excited about what tomorrow would bring. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough," Grace replied. But Theodore could hear reluctance in her voice as well. "You haven't imposed at all," he said firmly. "If anything, you've given me the best Christmas I've had in years." As evening approached, Theodore found himself dreading the return of solitude. The mansion would feel even emptier after experiencing it filled with laughter and conversation. But, more than that, he realized he didn't want to lose the connection he had formed with Grace and Lily. They had reminded him of who he used to be, before wealth and success had built walls between him and the rest of the world. That night at dinner, eaten together in the smaller breakfast room rather than the formal dining hall, Theodore made a decision that would change all their lives. He had spent the afternoon making phone calls and researching possibilities, using his resources and connections for something more meaningful than increasing his already vast wealth. "Grace," he said as they finished their meal, "I have a proposition for you." Out at the storm, which showed no signs of abating. Part of him hoped it would continue through Christmas Day, giving him more time with these unexpected guests who had somehow managed to pierce through the loneliness he had wrapped around himself like armor. Theodore thought about Grace's strength in raising her daughter alone, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, yet still maintaining her dignity and teaching her child to care about others. He thought about Lily's innocent wisdom and genuine concern for a lonely old man she had just met. For the first time in years, Theodore found himself looking forward to Christmas morning, not because of presents or traditions, but because he wouldn't be spending it alone. The irony wasn't lost on him that 2 strangers seeking shelter from a storm had ended up sheltering him from something far more devastating, the isolation that had been slowly consuming his life. As he prepared for bed, Theodore made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would find a way to help Grace and Lily, not just with their immediate needs, but in ways that could transform their lives. More importantly, he realized they had already begun transforming his.